First, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. This is certainly a somewhat of a step into the unknown in terms of having a virtual conference with all of you. FAST members were excited and wanted to have a conference, even though we couldn't meet in person through the tri-state event we typically host, which is slated for next year in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. But instead, we have this amazing opportunity, which really has allowed for a lot of very broad connections as we have put this together. I'm going to just share that our morning will be started with Phillip Marshall. We have then a break between 10 and 10:15. We have a financial exploitation training video that will begin at 10:15 to 11. We then have another break, and then we had a law enforcement officer who was going to be presenting a case study, and at the last minute, his schedule did not allow for him to be with us this morning, but instead, I'm very, very happy and grateful to say that we have the National Elder Fraud Hotline, who will be participating and sharing the work that they're doing at the national level to address financial exploitation. And so we have a representative from the Office of Victims of Crime at the federal level who will be joining us. So very excited for that. And so without further ado, it's with deep, deep gratitude, want to welcome Phillip Marshall as our speaker today. We have had many wonderful conversations to get us to this morning. He is an advocate nationwide for elder justice, and I don't want to take up any more of his time, so welcome, Phillip.
Joy, thank you. Thank you so much. And I think, can you hear me? You can. Excellent. What I will do, and is my screen being shared? Yes. Hello, everybody from Escalante, Utah, and it's delighted to be with you all today. What I'm going to do is end up bringing up my keynote. Here I am. Here's my desktop, which is a year ago today. I was in Washington, just south of Chelsea, heading on up to, as you'll find out, heading up to Shelburne. And so we're just going to start.
Phillip, we're not able to see your slides yet. So it says you have low bandwidth.
Oh, no.
Well, how about I bring up your presentation? Should we try that?
Okay.
So bear with me 1 minute.
Let's try that. Let me try once again, and if that doesn't work.
Okay.
So you can't see my slides.
I cannot.
Okay.
So
that's why you have the slides. And what I will do, thank you for working with me on this story.
I think what I'll do is you'll just need to tell me when to share slides. So okay. Turn the slides. So let me, I'm going to share my screen. So just a minute here. Can you see your slides now?
No. What, on the screen? No, I can't.
Let's see.
But let's do that.
Okay, we can see them.
You can see mine?
Yes.
Excellent. Can you see, here, I'll go full screen and let's see what happens. Does that work? Does that still work?
So I'm doing so we can, I think everyone sees your slides.
Are they seeing them through yours or mine?
Through mine.
Okay, so I'm going to just quit out because I don't really need to. I need to see them through yours. So I'm just going to quit out so I can see them. So I know where we are, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
Okay, just 1 second. Sorry about all this, everybody.
Yeah. And best laid plans. Yeah.
I'm 8 feet from an office with Wi-Fi, but I guess that wasn't close enough. Anyway, now so you can see, everybody can see the slides?
Yes, I believe so.
And my screen is not being shared, correct?
Correct.
Okay, but can I see the slides? Do I know what slide you're on?
I'm on the first slide, and I'm not sure why you're not able to see it. So the first slide says how to fast track elder justice.
Okay. Why don't we go through it, and if it's sounding like if it's not quite working, then we'll figure something out. So what we've got is how to fast elder justice, and the next slide, please. And then the next attention slide. And what I would like to do is to gain and maintain your attention. This keynote has been provided to you as a PDF file. What comes next is not so much information as information in progress. So your constructive critique is welcome and valued. Next slide, which will be what I identify as my menu. And I'd like you all to think of my keynote really as a menu that names and describes here, if you will, food for thought, with ingredients listed and linked to. All underlined text in slides lead to hyperlinked references and resources. You can navigate to the sections and then back to this menu in the upper right, with the globe. And next slide, Tori, please, which I think will say pre-serve.
Yes.
And what I have is every section is identified by one of these short identifiers. And so, Tori, the next one, which looks very much like a timber frame. For 4 decades, I served as a practitioner and professor of historic preservation. Preservation and elder justice are so similar for several reasons. Both respect and protect the ageless value of that which is old, but which may be discounted, sometimes until it's too late. Both take a multidisciplinary approach to a systemic problem that demands systems-based solution involving seemingly disparate disciplines. Both engage and empower those who serve and save. And both pre-serve or serve before foremost through preventive maintenance and care, knowing that damage control after the fact is insufficient. Both know at times intervention makes matters worse. And next slide, Tori. Here we are. Both realize ways we can live together forever through our life and through our legacy, achieved here as we celebrate the life and legacy of preservationists and mentor to many, Paul Brune, last October at Shelburne Farms. Next slide, please, Tori, that says VT. VT means a lot to me. Starting in the 60s, VT meant home. In the 90s, VT meant vanishing treasures, a National Park Service preservation program in the Southwest. Since the early 2000s, VT has meant vicarious trauma. Thank you for inviting a victim to present today. And referenced here, thank you for your work with DOJ to help victims of Vermont. Next slide, please, Tori. And the next one, which says Fast Track and Beyond Brook. Faster Vermont colleagues, thank you for inviting me. And thanks too to Peg Horn, who's on board with us today, for introducing me to FAST colleagues. Peg is New York City Elder with the New York City Elder Abuse Center. I'm honored to be with you today and all along the way. Since 2010, I have been border to border, coast to coast to coast, and been privileged to meet face to face, and now in our digital space with elder justice practitioners who do so much for so many, sometimes with so little. To cut to the chase, I feel there are 3 reasons I'm invited to speak about elder justice. I am a grandson of a famous philanthropist who was abused by her only child. I acted to save her against abuse. Due to the efforts of many, we were successful. Many people do not have a famous grandmother. Many people do not act. And if they do, many people do not share such success. I wish to address all 3 today in the context of trust achieved through relationships and responsibility. Next story, please, of my grandmother. My grandmother was Brooke Astor only in the last half of her century-long life. Next. In 1953, she married Vincent Astor, her 3rd and last husband. Vincent died in 1959. Next story, please, Patchwork Child. In 1962, at age 60, she wrote a memoir of her peripatetic patchwork childhood. You would think she would be steeped in nostalgia and ready to retire. Not so. Next, please, desk side. In 1947, Vincent had established the Vincent Astor Foundation for the alleviation of human misery. After Vincent's death, my grandmother, as president from 1960 to 1997, furthered the foundation's mission by addressing the quality of life through engaged philanthropy decades before the practice was mainstream. Next, please, Tori. The foundation provided grants to New York City's large cultural institutions, its jewels. Next, please. But my grandmother's most treasured grant recipients were organizations and communities where the foundation provided seed money and its Astor seal of approval to projects toward gaining greater investment and endowment, with many still sustained. Next story, please. Well into her 90s, my grandmother was center stage as New York's first lady and a humanist aristocrat with a generous heart. Next story. At age 96, she received the nation's top civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Bill Clinton, in recognition of her achievements. Her close friend, next story, please, with cakes. Her close friend, David Rockefeller, hosted a 100th birthday party. Then she disappeared from the limelight. This is until July 2006, when the contents of my guardianship petition, which was to have been sealed, was discovered by the press, leading to front page headlines reading, "Disaster for Mrs. Astor." My grandmother would never want to be known as one of America's greatest cases of elder abuse. Nor did she, while in the throes of Alzheimer's, choose to be victimized, deprived, manipulated, and robbed, all as part of a calculated scheme to defraud in the first degree, as characterized by the Manhattan District Attorney. Yet the sad circumstances surrounding my grandmother inform a timely and timeless cause in elder justice. This may be her greatest, most lasting legacy. At 104, she unknowingly entered her encore career as an advocate for older Americans and those in their circle of support. Just as her timing was critical with her philanthropy to advance intentionally the quality of life, so now in her advanced age, she unintentionally advanced the quality of life at the end of life. Our greatest impediment to elder justice is ageism. By example, my grandmother did so much to combat proactively this social impediment through the way she took on each day, year after year, decade after decade. It's ironic and so sad that my grandmother's ageless attitude did not protect her from abuse. The same can be said for millions of seniors suffering similar injury from such crimes today. Next cover slide, complacent, complicitory, please. And then down to the gateway of complacent, complicit. As my grandmother now rests in peace, I could have resumed my life as before. For years, my battle for my grandmother and against my father consumed my life and consumed our family. After a 6-month criminal trial and conviction of my father, a friend said, "Phillip, you must be glad that's all behind." But I realized when elder abuse hits home, it hurts. I realized while my grandmother was emotionally and financially abused and isolated, her case is far from isolated. 1 in 5 seniors are exploited, 1 in 10 are abused. I realized the aftermath of elder abuse far exceeds any dollar amount. Most costs are irretrievable, some compounded. I realized if my grandmother, Brooke Astor, can be victimized, elder abuse does not discriminate. Any senior is vulnerable. And I realized to be complacent about elder justice is to be complicit in elder abuse. Our silence protects perpetrators, not their victims. Today, victims of this crime may be strangers. Tomorrow, they may be our loved ones, or perhaps in the future, ourselves. Seniors and society deserve more. Yet, our national negligence is a proximate cause of elder abuse. Negligence can be at the personal, professional, or societal level. When our elders lose their sight, it's natural. But when we turn a blind eye to their plight, it's negligent. When our elders lose their hearing, it's natural. But when we are deaf to their cries for help, it's negligent. When our elders lose their voice, it's natural. But when we choose not to voice our concern, it's negligent. When our elders' capacity is reduced, it's natural. But when their assets are reduced without consent, it's criminal. Next slide, next cover slide, Tori, and then quote unquote family affair, please. In filing a guardianship petition for my grandmother, it was my hope that this family affair would be quietly settled. But for my grandmother and millions of other seniors, elder abuse is not a family affair, nor is it a civil matter. Elder abuse is a crime, and it needs to be treated as such so victims are not re-victimized by their perpetrators and by our lack of response and responsibility. If I could do it over again, I would have called the Manhattan District Attorney immediately. I remain forever grateful to Liz Lowy and her colleagues. At the time, Liz was lead prosecutor of the Elder Abuse Unit of the Manhattan DA's office. As we entered the criminal justice system, Liz coupled compassion with Kleenex, helping us find our voice and tell our story, allowing us to advance from taking a stand and helping my grandmother to taking the stand in criminal court for the greater cause of elder justice. At first, I didn't recognize the full meaning of elder justice. When my petition for guardianship was granted, I did not realize elder justice. I helped my grandmother and those trying to help her. I only realized elder justice when I and many others helped bring some of my grandmother's perpetrators, my father included, to justice. In so doing, I understand Reverend King's claim that true peace is not merely the absence of tension. It is the presence of justice. Here, elder justice. Next slide, cover from case to cause, and the slide after, which looks like a petition. After I filed my guardianship petition, we gained temporary guardianship immediately and permanent guardianship in an out-of-court settlement in October 2006. That December, the judge wrote a decision largely involving payment of legal fees and other expenses. Next slide. The judge found that I was the prevailing party, but the judge allowed for partial payment of my father's legal fees based on a report by the court evaluator who concluded, next slide, that allegations of intentional elder abuse by the Marshalls, my father and his third wife, were not substantiated. I believe the court evaluator's report never connected the dots with the decimal points. It never made a connection between his report and an appendix, a long list of financial dealings totaling tens of millions of dollars identified by the temporary guardian of the purse, J.P. Morgan Chase. The court evaluator's report opened the door wide to claims that there was no elder abuse. Astor's son is cleared, headlined the New York Times, which quoted my father's lawyer as saying, this is a case that was given birth from allegations that were absolutely fictitious regarding Mr. Marshall's care of his mother. On the dark December day of this decision, our Pyrrhic victory found us losing the greater war against elder abuse. Did this decision signal open season on seniors? Was my grandmother's guardianship petition to be elder justice's Plessy v. Ferguson, setting elder justice back for decades? Were we to repurpose my family's dirty laundry as surrender flags, giving up on the greater cause into which we had been so thrust? No. This one clause catapulted us from case to cause. Next cover slide on financials, and the next one being financials are at the forefront. In desperately trying to help my grandmother, I was not sure what to do. I sought advice from several trusted people, including a sage high school friend whose own family had been through similar circumstances. He advised, Phillip, follow your heart first, then follow the money. Our greatest concern was my grandmother's psychological abuse, one of the most difficult forms of elder abuse to give credence to, much less document and assess. So in large part, I felt our fallbacks were the financials. But I now know financials are at the forefront of our campaign for elder justice. The financial industry, regulators, nonprofits, including FAST teams, play a key leadership role in protecting seniors' net worth, self-worth, and lives. Next slide, please, on abuse. As most of you know, chronic elder abuse is delivered and endured in many forms. Frequently, seniors are poly-victimized and re-victimized. Forms, frequency, and duration of abuse are usually enhanced and escalated, especially when there's an intimate, long-term relationship between victim and perpetrator, as typically happens with hybrid elder financial exploitation, when various forms of abuse are strategically delivered to advance the perpetrator's desires and thefts. Next slide, please. My grandmother endured 6 forms of abuse repeatedly when and because she was in the throes of Alzheimer's. Next slide, please. While elder financial exploitation and fraud are 2 of the most prevalent forms of abuse, they are also detectable and evidential. This is why your work is so vital in arresting many forms of abuse. Next slide, the cover From Tribulation to Trial, and the slide that follows. The same time the guardianship judge said that elder abuse was not substantiated, the Manhattan DA impaneled a grand jury and issued subpoenas, resulting in a 2007 indictment of my father and one of my grandmother's attorneys, Francis Morrissey. Morrissey spent summers near my grandmother in Maine and spent the rest of the year in New York also. Morrissey was a serial perpetrator. He knew where the fishing was good and how to bait a hook. Next slide, please. After a 6-month criminal trial, in his closing argument, prosecutor Seidemann said, Mr. Marshall used his mother as his own little piggy bank, as his own ATM. Next slide of paintings. After her 100th birthday, I grew increasingly concerned for my grandmother. I began speaking with her supportive staff and caregivers. Here are but 2 of too many incidents. A transaction in early 2002 raised red flags. I heard that while my father was cutting back on my grandmother's expenses, he had sold her favorite painting, Child Haslam's Flags, 5th Avenue, one that she had bequeathed to the Metropolitan Museum. The sale realized $10 million, $2 million of which my father kept as a commission. On hearing of the sale, my grandmother, who had been led to believe she was running out of money, asked, now can I buy dresses? My grandmother went from the limelight center stage as lead actor in her own life to being gaslighted by her own child, who psychologically broke her down into believing she was going broke. As perpetrators know, psychological manipulation by undue influence is so effective in further compromising adults who have diminished capacity and even lack testamentary capacity. Undue influence can compromise their well-being and their wishes. In horror, I recognize this was happening to my grandmother when she was most vulnerable. Next slide, please, of an aerial. With some of the commission money My father and his third wife bought a weekend house in New Jersey. Next slide with financials. In 2003, my father worked out calculations for a retroactive raise for managing his mother's finances. My grandmother retained a professional advisor also. At one point, my father intended to back pay himself $8 to $9 million. He settled on $1 million. Why? Next slide of my great-grandfather. Major General Russell was my grandmother's father. Next slide, please. Before the U.S. Marine Corps University, my father said his grandfather was the compass of my life. He set me on the right course. With the $1 million retroactive salary increase, my father acquired a $900,000 yacht, which he named General Russell, and he hired a captain. He set his course to Maine, where by now my grandmother's property was in his third wife's name. My father was not convicted of the sale of this painting, the first count in the New York City Supreme Court indictment. Next slide, please. In April 2009, the criminal trial began. I had one message from my father: please plead and seek forgiveness. I had sought out people, his friends, associates, the clergy. I even tried to call in the Marines to find someone who might speak with my father to pierce his denial that, coupled with undue influence, shielded him from reality and remorse. My attempts were of no avail. Next slide of the New York Times. The jury's October verdict: my father was found guilty on 14 of the 16 counts against him. All but one were upheld on appeal. After spring and a long summer of heart-wrenching testimony, this was a very bittersweet harvest. Yet this harvest has so nourished the cause of elder justice. We advance from tribulation to trial. From the tribulation of hearing the allegations in my guardianship petition were unsubstantiated to a criminal trial that proved otherwise. The financials were critical to realizing justice. At 89, my father served 2 months of his 1 to 3 year sentence before being granted medical parole. My father died in 2014 at 90. Next slide, please. And next slide, red flags, and the slide that after with a red flag. As a semaphore, red flags signal a warning. In a battle against elder abuse and financial exploitation, our approach has been defensive. We look for red flags as warning signs of vulnerability of victims or attack by abusers. This is not a proactive, strengths-based approach. More so, our approach is framed in the context of an elder abuser dyad, leaving the rest of society seemingly sidelined. Next slide of warning signs. Understanding such signs, red flags, is helpful, but we need to signal an offensive stance too. Next slide of historic slide. In historic military battles, raising a solid red flag signifies a ship's intent to engage in combat, to be on the offensive. What red flags are we raising? Next slide, please. Senior Safe. With its Senior Safe program, Maine raised a red flag, signaling readiness to fight exploitation and abuse. Senior Safe was started by Judy Shaw. Judy Shaw, Securities Administrator for the Maine Office of Securities, presented before the Securities Exchange Commission in March 2018. Judy told a story about Dawn, a widow, a retired legal secretary who made 2 stops weekly without fail. One was her church, the other was her local credit union, to Effie, the branch manager. Effie became worried as Dawn was seemingly confused. Effie checked Dawn's account and saw that unusual automatic monthly withdrawal had been set up. Effie then reached out to one of Dawn's nearby daughters, who was also on the account. They soon realized Dawn was a victim of a work-at-home scam. The withdrawals were stopped, and Effie started treatment to help with her dementia. Dawn is Judy Shaw's mother. It is because of this experience that Judy realized the importance of people on the front line in the financial industry. This is one of the reasons why senior safe training and later legislation was created for banks and credit unions. Next slide, please. Effie was Judy's family's guardian angel. All of us can be guardian angels, capable guardian angels, each raising a red flag. Next slide of routine activity theory, which helps us understand why crimes happen and help us to prevent crime. Routine activity theory includes a physical convergence in time and space during our routine activities of a likely offender with the goal of committing crimes against a suitable target in the absence of a capable guardian. Next slide, please. What I suggest is a RIT 2.0 in the context of our analytical age with a focus on financials. And I hope that we can all encourage the financial industry to do this, but also that we can do it within all our realm of elder justice. Elder justice is in its infancy. So are big data analytics. Both seek to explore and enhance relationships and their value in our complex lives. Both must be cradled in a legally and ethically constituted trust framework. Big data can augment our abilities, reduce isolation, and foster collaboration, and signal exploitation as a mayday every day, every second. Big data includes streaming analytics toward detection and rapid response, and sandboxing, warehoused analytics toward proactive prevention. Next slide, please. Meanwhile, Senior Safe's program works so well that Senator Collins introduced legislation in the Senate to take it nationwide. The result, the Senior Safe Act, which became law in May of 2019, gives banks that accept training more certainty that they would not be liable for holding disbursements and disclosing account information to authorities. With Kurt Lewin's work on behavior change in mind, let's assume individuals will do the right thing and remove any restraints for them to do so. The Senior Safe Act does just this. Next slide of our flag. Our federal and states acts empower each of us to act. Our federal and states agency give each of us agency to act. Next slide, please. The Elder Justice Coordinating Council is doing just this by convening over a dozen agencies toward coordinating federal elder justice efforts. Next slide, please. When it comes to our great lowercase United States and tribes and territories, what we have are laboratories of democracy, as described by Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. And what we have is an opportunity, and my feeling is that, informed if only by my experience in preservation, that every single state needs to have a not-for-profit that coordinates activities of the state and serves as a voice to amplify concern and capacity, and to then, in concert with other states, coordinate efforts at a national level. This is what is just beginning to be accomplished with the nascent National Network of State Elder Justice Coalition, with the founders here listed as authors, but as the co-founders that are building this national elder justice movement state by state. And this is something toward fast-tracking elder justice that I encourage Vermont to consider. I believe Maine is working with the NSCJC and others, but I think there's an opportunity both to coordinate efforts internally within states, to amplify the message, especially when it comes to advocacy toward policy, here informed by Ageless Alliance Initiative, and to also really show as laboratories of democracy best practices, which is exactly what's happening today. Next slide, please. The trust twins and that which follows. Elder abuse is the betrayal of trust. Next slide, please. Elder justice is the provision of trust. Elder justice is the promise of trust, realized through our relationships and responsibility, our circles of support, and our ability to stand up to injustice. Next slide, please. Elder justice is the promise of trust with the trust twins, ethics and agency. Our ethical and moral responsibility to act, coupled with our response ability, or our ability to respond through our agency. This is underscored by Nassim Nicholas Taleb in his recent book, Skin in the Game, where he mentions that in the real world, it is hard to disentangle ethics on one hand from knowledge and competence on the other. Next slide, please. Elder justice is the promise of trust with confidence. It is confidence that helps victims and those in their circle of support who reach out, having experienced the betrayal of trust so inflicted. Individuals trust experts' ethics as they confide in you, knowing you trust them. Individuals trust your agency as they are confident that you and other experts can help too, and not question their motives. Yet under duress, trust may be tried and compromised. Next slide, the trust triad and the one that follows. Let's consider our promise moving forward. Next slide, please, of two of my grandmother's closest friends, Annette de la Renta and David Rockefeller, here at my grandmother's funeral at St. Thomas Church. In many ways, the beginning of our effort to help my grandmother started with the end, with the idea that independently, then collectively, we could not imagine not doing whatever possible to respect my grandmother's wish to spend her last days at her country house. Next slide, please. Which she did with family and friends and free from fear. It was because of my grandmother's circle of support that she was able to come full circle. Old age must never be considered a terminal stage, but when where life returns full circle, cradled in trust. Next slide, please. Our promise of trust extends far into the future through the trust triad, to include our understanding of individuals' life goals and legacy wishes. Constructive conversations in these realms can help protect our own life goals and wishes and serve as an entry point toward proactive prevention of abuse and exploitation. Partnerships with faith-based communities helps here. Next slide on realizing elder justice and the one that follows. Justice is achieved when we realize our social compact between society and self in equal measure. Elder ecology, my term, is an engagement and empowerment of our circles of support, strengthened by concern, capacity, and collaboration to provide a firm foundation that allows us to rise and stand up to injustice by practicing upstandership. Again, my term. Here, we realize our personal and professional responsibility to act, knowing our community has our back. Next slide, please. Elder ecology and that which is followed. Vulnerability theory informs our understanding of circles of support, help, and humanity. Martha Feynman, with the Vulnerability in Human Condition initiative at Emory University School of Law, posits that as human beings, we are embodied and inherently vulnerable, and so inevitably, we are embedded beings in society. Sometimes we need help, sometimes we can help, or usually both. Brene Brown is quick to underscore that those who offer to help are vulnerable too. Next slide, please. In developing the Stamp Out Elder Abuse campaign, which I invite you to take a look at, when we were developing the website, we realized that in fact, help for those who want to get involved and for those who need help, the resources are the same. But the idea is to get involved early before you need help within your community so that you can help others, but also you have this relationship that has already been developed. Next slide, please. Helping. Despite an almost total lack of support or resources, family, friends, and neighbors step up as concerned persons to help older adults who are elder abuse victims. Yet helping hurts, as confirmed by findings of research conducted by Cornell University as published in the Gerontologist. So informed, the New York City Elder Abuse Center started a helpline for concerned persons, helping older adults who live in New York. The published research was coupled with a companion article in Huffington Post that Risha Breckman and I wrote to reach a broader audience. Concerned person Nancy Oates designed a graphic for the Huffington Post article. The article artwork describes a concerned person's altruistic act with the word helping, which balances on a tightrope and ends with a dangling letter G. As a grandson who helped his grandmother, I can identify with Nancy's dangling G, but to be more accurate, the G represents gender, the G represents gender disequity. Next slide, please. As Justitia holds the balance, she acknowledges that ageless equity, my term, will be strengthened when we practice gender equity. Intersectionality between gender, race, age, and other forms of social discrimination and disadvantage doesn't have an expiration date. Neither does justice. Next slide, please. As principal actors, concerned persons draw the line. This line becomes a battle line. At times, concerned persons position themselves as human shields to protect older adults. At times, concerned persons become collateral damage. This line becomes a slack line that concerned persons balance, burdened by all of life's other responsibilities while now navigating dangerous, uncharted territory. Concerned persons hang on by a thread. Alone, concerned persons cannot weave the secure safety net for seniors, self, and society. Next slide, please. Society's secure safety net is woven by all of us. Our safety net works, next slide, please, only when we have safety networks. Next slide, please. Formal and informal and in unison. Sorry, I'm completely, just a sec. strengthened through policy, protocol, and practice and advocacy. Next slide, please. It helps to take this personally because we're talking about our future self. And this model is adapted from Uri Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory for children, not for adults, but it considers time. I am considering time here in a very different sense because it includes not just the future, but our future self. Next slide, please. We don't need to have millions of dollars to practice philanthropy. All you need is love. For philanthropy is the love of humanity. Elder justice is in its infancy compared to other realms that define our social, legal, and moral obligations. Elder justice can help complete, not compete with, other causes, mindful of Hegel paraphrase that the conflict is not between good and evil, but between goods that are each making two exclusive acclaim. Next slide, please. Let's look at the circles of support for older adults, starting with elders, and then going to experts and so on. Next slide, please. Tracy Jenren and colleagues note, as we know, ageism or discrimination based on age is extraordinarily complex and is often covert. Next slide, please. Let's take prepositions and their relationship with elders. To explore the relationships in our circle support, when we look at prepositions, we realize prepositions are used to show the relationship between a noun or reflective pronoun and a preceding word in a sentence. Prepositions preposition. They introduce the object of attention in a specific qualified context. In doing so, prepositions may be prejudicial as they pre-qualify explicitly the object in a semantic relationship and implicitly a relationship with the subject speaker, here within our circle of support. Next slide. My entire presentation presumes that our social compact is realized within the interdependence of society and self in equal measure. Next slide, please. By elders. And next slide, please. By elders denies interdependence and disregards trust, but some seek to maintain complete independence and privacy above all else. Perpetrators know this to their advantage. Next slide, please, for elders, and the slide after. At the far end of the spectrum, for elders implies plenary guardianship, which strips citizens of all their rights. Some guardianships may provide a weapon and a shield, allowing perpetrators to completely isolate incapacitated persons and then steal their net worth and self-worth. Some of these are state sanctioned, whether by omission or commission. Next slide, with elders, and the slide that follows. Here I might be getting ahead of myself, but with elders is optional, conditional, and implies there might be a without. With elders is dualistic, positing an us-them relationship, which is usually trauma-based in form. With elders objectifies to reduce selfhood more. With elders discounts countless older experts in the field who help and caregivers who help every day. And most critically, with elders denies our future self today and every step along the way. Next slide, please. Elder justice. And so let's help our future self, and slide after, and know that seniors here, 100-year-old resident of our town at home, is really good at working on puzzles with people. Next slide. What Joan Harbison and her colleagues do a really good job within less than a sentence of assessing the relationship of what's happened with elders and what's happened with, as a result, all of you as experts. Harbison, and I flip these around, says because of the particular characteristics of helplessness and vulnerability and frailness assigned to an older population. Basically, elders have been discounted, and to play hardball for those who are complacent about elder justice, senior discount is redundant because they've already discounted seniors. What has happened here is experts came along, and as a social problem, elder abuse and neglect was shaped as a problem that required professional expertise. So much of what Harbison is saying, elder abuse and neglect, was created socially, and then experts rightfully identified these issues, but then have claimed responsibility. And just one example of this is activities of daily living are so incredibly important in terms of our independence. And this is what a lot of professionals are looking at to try to maintain ADLs for anybody. But the reality is what's equally important that, we have these networks where the aging can focus on independence and these, but what's equally important, sorry, Tora, I think what I'd like right now is the activities of daily loving. Is that without an equal measure, what we need is activities of daily living, of interdependence by concerned persons, not just experts here, of intentional activities. Next slide, please. So what happens is, continuing with Harbison, is that it's a social problem. Elder abuse and neglect is shaped as a problem that requires professional expertise. And next slide, please. And my goal here in terms of fast tracking elder justice is to draw elders back in and recognize that elders themselves are at the center of their circle of support in terms of empowerment, and that concerned persons are critical, and that we need to engage concerned persons. And in so doing, what we can do is engage in concerned persons. We can then help connect both the informal and formal networks, and we can also help concerned persons as advocates in concert with experts draw society that's been sidelined back in toward engagement and empowerment. Tori, I have a question. How much I'm running, I can stop now or I can continue.
Well, I think let's go ahead and continue and not short shrift. We have a break scheduled, so we can use that time, and let's do it.
What I will then do is I will then segue from circles of support to the next thing, which is identified as upstandership in the next slide, and quickly go through upstandership to sort of complete the circle. After the title slide, elder justice is the promise of trust, realized through our relationships, through elder ecology, and our responsibility through upstandership. Justice is achieved, next slide please. Justice is achieved when we realize our social compact between society and self. And here, upstandership, elder ecology provides a firm footing to allow us to rise and stand up to injustice. Next slide, please. As you all know, based on the New York study, only 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse are reported. Only 1 in 44 cases of elder financial exploitation are reported, as revealed in the amazing Under the Radar study. Next slide, please. We know that there's a tremendous bystander effect. Bystanders stand by on the sidelines. Life is not a spectator sport. Life and death is not a spectator sport. My question to myself when I was trying to figure this out was I was trying to look at to see what models existed to empower us to stand up to injustice. And just bystander effect is prevalent. Bystander intervention still implies no lack of engagement between society and self and empowerment. And so I have developed this concept on upstandership. Next slide, please. In upstandership, society supports individual responsibility and agency. Next slide, please. Both capable guardians in the routine activity theory and as identified concerned persons practice upstandership. But what is so critical is professions, both in all arenas, but especially in the legal arena, need to understand that upstanders must have standing. And it wasn't that long ago when victims themselves did not have standing. Certainly through the court decision of Linda R.S. versus Richard D. in '73, but then starting in the '80s, victims, primary victims, now have standing. Secondary victims and upstanders and all society needs to have standing in the system so they can stand up by practicing upstandership. Next slide, please. Let's begin the journey between this engagement and empowerment of both society and self. Next slide, please. And I'm diving this through as concerned persons, not just family, friends, and neighbors, which is what the New York City Elder Abuse Hotline works with, but also all of us as concerned persons, including professionals, including those who work, play, and with whom we work, play, and pray. As a concerned person, our hero's journey begins when the suffering of another person commands our attention. Awareness fosters our personal connection and concern. To be aware is to be on guard, to beware. Through knowledge, we acknowledge alleged or actual injustice, and we acknowledge our personal responsibility to act. Next slide, please. Through our agency, when we act, we need to know society has our back. Society's responsibility or ability to respond must match and mesh with our personal responsibility. Otherwise, our agency is diminished and matters may get worse. Justice is informed by trauma-informed response to include restitution, reduce risk, and repair. Next slide, please. Advocacy is suffered by persons who suffer trauma, primary and secondary, both individuals and professionals. As credible messengers, advocates command society's attention and help bring our path full circle to become whole. Next slide, please. Within this context, I just want to take a look at a few opportunities here toward fast-tracking elder justice. Here we have, in essence, a large amount of preventive practices can be achieved through individual empowerment society-wide. At this point, we've really been focusing on intervention. Once individuals report, refer, or respond, we're saving. Next slide, please. Here, I am so hoping that statewide and nationwide, we can develop what I'm calling a unified reporting portal, which is somewhat self-descriptive, but where all partners who are involved in response are coordinated from the onset, including FAST teams, so we can fast track elder justice. Here, this would be a tremendous red flag that we could raise to signal to perpetrators that we're responding. Next slide, please. The other thing is, granted that we have been doing a lot of intervention and have been less able to focus on prevention. There's still a lot of opportunity, both with FAST teams and enhanced multidisciplinary teams, to, in essence, during the process of intervention, and so informed through postmortem and through advocacy, focus on helping to almost pre-FAST and pre-EMDT prevention, to use the skill set and the knowledge in response to help in saving, to help serving. And I just got a few more. The next slide, please. Upstandership, each of the 8 steps along the way is articulated on its own terms and articulated with subsequent ones chronologically, but also across between society and self. Next slide, please. Here, justice and knowledge are coupled up. And I just want to make it clear that when it comes to elder justice, justice is not just at the heart of elder justice, justice is the heart of elder justice. And here, this is this project I have been touting since 2014 when the late Lori Stiegel, who with the American Bar Association was working on finishing up the legal issues related to elder abuse guide for law enforcement that ABA, Commission on Law and Aging, was working with, funded by DOJ, with the idea of a I do not like negative campaigns. I prefer positive. So here it's no elder abuse on our beat. It's that knowledge works in terms of empowering and engaging with communities. Next slide, please. The 8 steps may seem like a lot, but there are ways to hack upstandership, hereby pre-serving, and both our personal or qualitative experience coupled by expert experience, which is both qualitative and quantitative, combined, where we can take our agency and really focus on attention. And here the focus I want to make is that, informed by David Burns and colleagues who just published thoughts on developing the standard data for elder abuse, is we need data and we need analytics, but we need the data in elder abuse to inform practices, coordination, accountability, response, and long-term blue sky to inform funding and investment through things like social impact bonds. And last here, next slide, please. We can also hack upstandership by prescripting, by taking people who have proven agency and capacity personally, both personally and professionally, and focus on commanding other people's attention, and by example, showing people how you can, in essence, prescript. The prescription is prescripting, and this has been developed by, in part through business schools through Mary Gentili, on how to, in her work with ethical leadership. But I think there's a lot of opportunity here. Next slide, please. Thank you for inviting me today, and thank you for allowing me to sort of describe my concept of circles of support, strengthen to develop this more robust concept of elder ecology and upstandership. I welcome your comment, and to leave on a high note, it's Carl Pimler has said on the next slide that elder abuse is likely the most widespread problem of older people that is largely preventable. Let's get there. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Philip. Wonderful. So happy to have had you. This presentation has been recorded, and there will be a link in the chat to a Google Drive where you can get Philip's presentation, as well as his contact information, which is on the first slide of his presentation. So Philip, once again, thank you so much. We are going to take a 5-minute break, And then we'll get started with our next presentation, which is a training video that FAST developed for to share with law enforcement, and really, I think, fulfills Phillip's thoughts about taking another look and being very present